How the Legend of Zelda games fit canonically into a timeline has interested me ever since I learnt of this image. This is the official timeline that was created by Nintendo and was published in around 2011, pretty much the first official timeline for these games. You can find this specific timeline in the Hyrule Historia book. There's a lot of things you shouldn't trust in Hyrule Historia, oh, and the Zelda Encyclopedia. Trust me, they had me believe that my favorite game, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, was set in a world that was made by Skull Kid and disappeared once Link left. Wrong. So wrong. I will never live down that mistake I etched into my Zelda Iceberg video. So then, why believe that this timeline is canon? Well, because it doesn't exactly go against any pre-established lore, and there's multiple versions of the timeline. These versions have some different visuals, and they have a few more games on them. You can view these updated versions in the Zelda Encyclopedia and on the Zelda website. You can find these timelines through a simple Google search, but I'll link the Legend of Zelda website one in the description if you want to check it out. So for this video, we'll be looking at the timeline found in the Zelda Encyclopedia because it was published in 2018. Looking at the timeline, you'll notice that we have a timeline split right after the events of Ocarina of Time. A timeline split in my opinion is fine, I suppose, but when does it end? A better question is, when should it end? Right now, because if this timeline split continues, I feel like it'll hinder the canonical timeline of events in the Legend of Zelda universe. I know that a lot of people don't care about the Zelda timeline, but myself and many others do. It connects all the games that we love together in this amazing fantasy world we've been given to experience. Also, if you couldn't tell, there's a bunch of games missing. Honestly, they're mostly all spin-off games, but one of the biggest games that's missing is Breath of the Wild. And with Breath of the Wild 2 on the horizon, it got me thinking, where would it fit on the timeline? It's been said to just sit under everything else, but that's pretty vague. So by taking what we already have and adding to it to converge the splits together for Breath of the Wild and continuing the franchise down there, we can fix the Zelda timeline. And by fix, I mean have Breath of the Wild 1 and 2 properly added to it. To do this, we need to add a few not so mainline Zelda games to it too. But before we jump headfirst into this video, I have a new channel with Harru, aka Harry, called Soda Jump. You may know Harry from such videos as the SMG4 Iceberg, Fallen Master Donkey Kong, and Smashing My Step Bro.
What are you doing, Step Bro?
That one's a classic. He's a good friend, and we're going to be playing games on the channel with plans for other funnies.
Yep.
You're locked in. No! Alright, you got this. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to check it out, a link to the channel will be in the description. Now let's continue on with the video. So here's what we have to work with on this timeline. For context, we should go through it all. I won't go crazy in depth with the details, at least not after the events of Skyward Sword, but I'll explain enough to give you all a good understanding of the timeline. The chronology begins with the creation of heaven and earth. These places were watched over by the goddesses Din, Faror, and Nehru, the goddesses of power, courage, and wisdom respectively. They created the earth, life, order, and then peaced out, but not before leaving behind the Triforce, a powerful artifact. I'm sure that would never backfire. A fourth goddess, Hylia, was entrusted with the Triforce. So then, something funny happens. It all backfires. The Demon King Demise fought Hylia and the humans with his minions to get the Triforce. Hylia took some land and the surviving humans into the sky, and that's how we got Skyloft. Hylia also stripped herself of her divinity and allowed herself to be reincarnated in a mortal form for when Demise would attack again, and created the spirit Fi, along with the goddess Sword. This is followed by the events of Skyward Sword where Demise returns along with Hylia, but more specifically, her first reincarnation as Zelda, and Link, the first chosen hero of the goddesses. After some back and forth fighting, questing, time traveling, and obtaining the Master Sword to steal the darkness, Link is triumphant and kills Demise in the past and ends his tyranny. Demise vows for an incarnation of his hatred, aka Ganon, to forever follow those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero in a cycle without end. The people of Skyloft then returned to the surface to repopulate. Their descendants became known as Hylians because they lived in the land of Hyrule. So that's why Link, Zelda, Ganon, and other associates are in constant battle with each other. Now there were some back and forth funnies that went on after returning to the surface, and then the Hyrule Kingdom was established, and the rest is history from here. Literally. The Minish Cap, Vati's first appearance, the Light Force, and our second chosen hero Link. Four Swords, Vati's resurrection after his defeat in Minish Cap. Link uses the power of the Four Sword to split into 4 versions of himself to defeat Vati and seal him in the Four Sword. A long time passes and there's a Hylian civil war going on. A dying woman gives her baby boy Link to the Great Deku Tree. He was the hero of time, going back and forth through his childhood and adult life via time travel thanks to the Master Sword to stop Ganondorf from ruling over Hyrule. The Sacred Realm becomes the Dark World, and Ganondorf becomes Demon King Ganon, just like Demise once was. This is also the first time we see the Triforce split off into its 3 parts and attach themselves to each important character. This happened because Ganondorf tried to claim the whole Triforce but couldn't because of his lack of balance regarding power, wisdom, and courage. Link beats Ganondorf, who then reveals his true form, Ganon, and then Link and Zelda beat him. Nighty night! Ganon is sealed away as Ganondorf through the help of the Master Sword and 7 sages. Zelda returns Link to his own time to experience his childhood through the power of the Ocarina of Time. But now, we have a sticky situation. The timeline splits into 3 branches after the events of Ocarina of Time. One timeline depicts the events that follow Link's triumph over Ganon and the other his defeat. The section of the timeline where Link triumphs is further divided into 2 separate realities. The child era, where Link returns to his original time, and the adult era, where the hero of time disappears and Ganondorf is freed to return unopposed. Are you following? Good, because we're still going. Let's start off at my least favorite timeline split. The hero is defeated. Ganondorf gathers up the rest of the Triforce and then he's sealed away in the corrupted Sacred Realm, which is then turned into the Dark World by Zelda and the 7 sages. Look, it's one thing to actually show Link's defeat and then eventual comeback, but this? I'm not really a big fan of being told, yeah, Link dies here in an alternate dimension and that's how we fit these games in. It's just told to us, not shown, which is a shame because it's a really interesting concept. You know, the hero, Link, being defeated and then the near future aftermath of that. The decline of Hyrule and the last hero, the imprisoning war, there was peace, psych, it's gone, and the Sacred Realm reopened, leading to people to fight over the Triforce. People who went in were never seen again and Ganon's army poured out of it. Were the people turned into his army? Who knows, but the sages closed the realm again and Hyrule was left impoverished. Then, there was peace again, the era of light. Psych! It's gone again! Enter the era of dark. A link to the past, the resurrection of Ganon happens here and the hero, Link, can travel between Hyrule and the Dark World thanks to the magic mirror to save the 7 maidens. Ganon gets stomped on and everyone is saved. Link's awakening. After defeating Ganon, Link gets lost at sea and is sent to a dream world called Koholint made by the Windfish and he has to defeat the nightmare and wake it up. The Windfish is woken up, Koholint disappears, nighty night Marin. Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. Twin Rover revives Ganon. Link defeats him and restores peace to Holodrum and Labrina. The Triforce separates and Ganon, despite being sealed in darkness, obtains the Triforce of Courage. A link between worlds. There's an alternate dimension called Lorule that destroyed their Triforce. There's some back and forth dimension traveling to save the 7 sages, Zelda, Hyrule, Lorule, and the Hyrule-Lorule counterparts. Yuga and Ganon are defeated and Link uses the Triforce to wish Lorule's Triforce back into existence. Triforce Heroes. Link leaves Hyrule and goes to Hytopia, defeats Lady Maud with the help of 2 other lookalikes. Hyrule enters a golden era, and then an era of decline occurs when Zelda is put under an eternal slumber. She was then named Princess Zelda I. The Prince of Hyrule decreed that every girl born into the royal family need be named Zelda. The Legend of Zelda, a descendant of Princess Zelda I, splits the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces to keep it away from Ganon. Link finds all of the pieces, defeats Ganon, Hyrule and its people are saved. The Adventure of Link. 6 years after The Legend of Zelda, Link finds out about Princess Zelda I and heads out to find the Triforce of Courage that was hidden by the king before the events of The Legend of Zelda. Link defeats the 6 Guardians, defeats his shadow self, gets the Triforce of Courage, assembles the Triforce and wakes Princess Zelda I from her slumber. And that's the Hero is Defeated timeline split. It's a pretty big one full of back and forth conflict and tragedies. Now let's move on to the Hero is Triumphant timeline split, specifically the Child timeline. Kicking off after Ocarina of Time, Link is looking for Navi and he gets lost trying to find her. He bumps into a Skull Kid wearing Majora's Mask accompanied by 2 fairies. They take Epona, F Link's shit up, and Link finds his way to an alternate dimension called Termina. Link has 3 days to stop Skull Kid from destroying this place with the goddamn moon. 10 out of 10. Link gathers all 4 giants, helps the people of Termina deal with their griefs, becomes a deity and beats Majora, saving Skull Kid, the people of Termina, and the masked salesman gets his mask back. What a guy. Twilight Princess. Several years after Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf was sentenced to death but was literally too angry to die. So, the sages used the Mirror of Twilight to banish him to the Twilight Realm. Not our problem, they said, until it became their problem again. Ganondorf teams up with a Twily, descendants of the Interlopers who used to be Hylians named Zant, to take over everything, making Twilight Realm spill into Hyrule. Link, a farm boy, teams up with Midna, a Twily, and they save Zelda, Hyrule, and the Twilight Realm from Ganondorf and Zant. Midna goes back to the Twilight Realm and destroys the Mirror of Twilight, severing the connection between Hyrule and the Twilight Realm. 4 Swords Adventures. Ganondorf is back. Wow, when isn't he back? It's been hundreds of years since Ganondorf's death. The people of Hyrule had reconciled with the Gerudos, the race of big ladies Ganondorf is born from, and then he's born again. He thinks it'll be funny if he releases Vaati from the 4 Sword, and he would have been trapped in there for a damn while. So Link splits off into 4 again, they rescue the Shrine Maidens, obtain the 4 jewels, destroy Vaati, and seal Ganon in the 4 Sword. That's the Child timeline. Small, but I love it. This one's a trip, and it's the most unique split out of them all. Ganon is sealed away in the corrupted Sacred Realm with the Triforce of Power. Zelda got to keep the Triforce of Wisdom, and Link's Triforce of Courage was segmented into 8 parts and scattered over Hyrule after he went back to his Child timeline. After a long time passes, Ganon escapes and attacks Hyrule. With no hero to fight him, King Daphnes and the people plead for the goddesses to help them out. And they sure did. They asked those they wanted to save and rebuild Hyrule to chill on top of mountains, and then they flooded everything. Ganondorf returns, what a shocker, but he's a little wiser. Link's sister is stolen. Link, Tetra, who is a pirate, and her crew go save Link's sister, and Tetra awakens as Princess Zelda. The Triforce pieces are gathered, King Daphnes, aka the King of Red Lions, wishes Hyrule to be flooded again, and Ganondorf is defeated. Phantom Hourglass. Link and Tetra find the world of the Ocean King to investigate a rumor of ships disappearing. Tetra boards the ghost ship, very smart, and doesn't return. Oopsies! Link falls into the ocean trying to save her and washes onto the shore of Mersey Island. Link, with the help of Ciela, a fairy, Oshus, an old man who turns out to be the Ocean King, and Linebeck, a full-time legend/boat captain, travel the seas with Ciela and Linebeck, uncovering secrets of the world, Phantom Hourglass, and finding quest-related items to forge the Master Sword and then the Phantom Sword to defeat Bellum, the big squid of the seas. Tetra is saved by Link, and the crew continue on their way to find a new continent. Lucky last, Spirit Tracks. Link, Tetra, and the crew find a new continent spanning with spirit tracks. On the land stood the Tower of Spirits, created by the Lokomo tribe to bind the Demon King Malladus to the land. Uh-oh, the spirit tracks start disappearing. Link, a royal engineer, and Zelda, a descendant of Tetra, head to the Tower of Spirits to investigate. Some dudes named Chancellor Coil and Bayern ruin everything. Zelda dies instantly. Link and Zelda's spirit travel to 4 temples. Malladus possesses Zelda's body, everyone goes to the Dark Realm. Malladus and Cole are smitten with the Lokomo sword. Zelda gets her body back, the Lokomo return to the heavens, and peace returns to Hyrule. Well, that was a lot to explain, and for good reason. There's so many games on the timeline and so much lore associated with each game that sometimes spans into other games. Shoutouts to the people over at the Zelda.fandom wiki website where I got a lot of this information from. I'll leave a link to the page in the description if you want to read further about the timeline. Now, if you have a keen eye, you would have noticed one of the biggest Zelda games missing from the timeline. That's right, Link's Crossbow Training, the best-selling Zelda game of all time. Hahaha, yes! Yes! Ugh. Nah, it's Breath of the Wild. Why has the timeline not been updated to include one of the most recent and biggest Zelda games? Quote from the Game Rant article by Nimr Abdurrahman, explaining the Legend of Zelda timeline and where Breath of the Wild fits. Link in description. In 2018, after months of not placing Breath of the Wild anywhere within an official timeline, Nintendo ultimately stuck the game at the end of the entire thing and left it up to player interpretation. However, with secrets in the game directly referencing Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild might actually take place under one of the 3 timelines. End quote. Well, that's a little silly, leaving it up to player interpretation, but that's where I come in, and I'm coming hard! So, the game is meant to be set at the end of the timeline, but which split? We have part of the quote stating that because there's a Wind Waker reference, it could go in the adult era split. But what if I told you that there are references from all timelines in Breath of the Wild? I've already stated that to fix the timeline, we need to converge the splits to account for Breath of the Wild. And this is why I said it, because we need to bridge this gap right here. To start us off, we need to look at a legendary Zelda spin-off game, Hyrule Warriors on the Wii U, 3DS, and Nintendo Switch. This fun Zelda spin-off full of historic characters is where we have to start. If you've watched my Legend of Zelda Iceberg video, link in description, you would have heard me talk about how we can use this game to converge the timeline splits together. Hashtag make Hyrule Warriors canon. You've probably heard Matt Pat talk about it on Game Theory too, but this goes even further than he or my previous video ever could. Basically, long ago, Ganondorf's soul had been splintered into 4 parts. One part lies in the Master Sword, and the others were sealed away in different time periods. Hyrule becomes under attack by monsters led by Sia, a sorceress who has the hots for Link. She never used to be like this or even existed. She was in fact part of a greater being alongside her counterpart, Lana, who has the hots for Link but is pretty good at not destroying everything to claim him. This being was the Guardian of Time, who was like a goddess of time but had the hots for Link. Guardian of Time, Goddess of Time. Where have I heard that before? Majora's Mask, keep that in mind. Anyway, Sia was able to get a hold of monsters by utilizing the Gate of Souls, a portal to different times and space. Times and space, huh? Interesting. As the game continues, Link, Zelda, Impa, and Lana attempt to stop the resurrection of Ganondorf. However, the Gate of Souls is used to also bring notable heroes, enemies, and land masses from different time periods as well as different spaces, aka different timeline splits. Regarding the story mode, these characters and land masses are specifically taken from Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Wind Waker, 2 out of the 3 timeline splits. But there are some characters from Link's Awakening, Spirit Tracks, and A Link Between Worlds that are playable that have no relation to the main story. That's a good thing to note. So Link and the gang of new and not so new faces go up against Sia and her gang of new and not so new faces. Sia realizes that she's being used by Ganondorf, her and Lana will never be with Link, she makes a sacrifice, Ganondorf gathers a Triforce and becomes Ganon, Ganon is defeated, the heroes of the past and their lands return back to their times, Lana watches over the Triforce and the Master Sword is returned to its pedestal. Now there was also a story-related DLC based on the lands of the Wind Waker with Wind Waker characters. Some evil stuff happens because of Phantom Ganon, Sia's back, and once Phantom Ganon is defeated, Lana, Sia, and Link return back to Hyrule where Lana and Sia resume their roles as the Guardian. Also, you're probably thinking, at what times are each character and pieces of land taken from their times? When it's convenient and doesn't interrupt the plot of the games they're from, everybody. Yes! Woo-hoo-hoo! We could also say that when characters and places are sent back to their time, the characters involved don't remember what happened, and the lands are put back in their places like nothing happened. We sure could. We're going to place this game right here on the timeline in the child era split. You're probably wondering, Lamau, why? Well, for two main reasons. The first one being because we need to establish the Guardian of Time as a cemented character. Do you remember when I pointed out that there's mention of a goddess of time in Majora's Mask? Here's where that information comes in. Zelda was the one that pointed this goddess out to Link during his flashback after re-obtaining the Ocarina of Time. With the protection of the Goddess of Time, playing the Song of Time allows Link to travel back in time to the point that he first entered Clocktown in Termina. Dawn of the first day. The dawn is your enemy, but also your frenemy, always leaving him with 3 days to stop the moon from falling on Termina. This power also allows Link to time travel forward in certain intervals and slow down time to a 0.5 times speed. So it seems like there are two types of time travel in the Zelda universe. The type that has time accelerate forwards or backwards with actions affecting the past, present, and or future. That's the case for Majora's Mask. The other, more complicated form of time travel creates multiple timelines and whatnot, like in Ocarina of Time. So, the Goddess of Time isn't mentioned in any other Zelda games, but she is mentioned to be Nehru in the Oracle of Ages manga, but I wouldn't count that seeing as the mangas are usually retellings of previously established stories. The Goddess of Time is a really obscure goddess. Zelda games and lore love the number 4, seeing as it's littered throughout every game, and let's make room for another goddess among the other 4. Din, Faror, Nehru, Hylia, and now the goddess/guardian of time. But now, we need to find a connection between the goddess of time and the guardian of time. Psych! They're the same person. Think about it. A being that rules over time is only ever mentioned twice, and they have slightly different titles. However, deity beings with the titles of gods and goddesses can be looked at as guardians. So, whatever title the Goddess of Time has, whether that be goddess or guardian, she's still related to ruling and protecting time. Who this deity is isn't too important, but it feels nice to establish her as a character. Also, something important to note is Ciela, the fairy from Phantom Hourglass, is the spirit of time and courage. A spirit of time. Could the goddess/guardian of time have underlings? Let's say yes. Speaking of time, Ganondorf was separated into 4 pieces with 3 of them being scattered throughout time. That's the other reason for placing Hyrule Warriors in this split, because of this one detail. We need to establish when this event happened to add it in. Nothing is known on who, what, where, why, or how Ganondorf was segmented into these 4 pieces. We know when it happened, it was a long time ago. Because of how vague the information is, it's hard to pinpoint what happened here. Was there a battle between a chosen hero and Ganondorf? Did the goddess/guardian of time assist in sealing Ganondorf throughout time? A gap between dimensions? Who knows? This would have happened after Four Sword Adventures, so Ganon would have had to have escaped the Four Swords somehow, so something happens here, a battle of some kind. The Four Swords splits Link into 4 counterparts, so maybe the Four Sword did it to Ganondorf too, perhaps in a vanquishing evil way. Wait, I'm missing something. I forgot to mention Linkle. She's a lady Link that thinks she's the reincarnated hero because of the compass she has that's been passed down to her from her grandma. She gets into some conflict with Skull Kid, and clearly, she's not the hero because she always ends up going the wrong way. Some sort of divine intervention maybe? It's funny. But now, we have the events set before Hyrule Warriors, and we also have Hyrule Warriors and the game's events on the timeline. It's all coming together! It's time to converge the splits! We know that Breath of the Wild takes place in an era long after the events of earlier games. The legends from these games have now become myths. 10,000 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, something known as Calamity Ganon returned and was defeated. As we know, he was also revived 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild and wasn't stopped. The attempt was made using ancient Sheikah technology, mainly the Guardians and the Divine Beasts, primarily made to stop Calamity Ganon. To pilot these Divine Beasts, 4 champions were selected from each Hyrulean race outside of the Hylians. Daruk, the Goron champion, Mipha, the Zora champion, Revali, the Rito champion, and Urbosa, the Gerudo champion. Link was a champion too, the champion hero, and they all died. Calamity Ganon takes over the Guardians and Divine Beasts, Zelda's abilities awakened, Link is taken to the Shrine of Resurrection, an ancient Sheikah building, and then Link revives 100 years later to defeat Calamity Ganon. The whole time Link was being revived, Zelda held the line. 100 years is a long time to do something like that, but it's not nearly as long as Vaati was held in the Four Sword. But yeah, ancient Sheikah technology is pretty cool. So cool in fact that I would say the Sheikah created the timeline convergence. Let me explain. I said that the Sheikah had a technological boom 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild. What I didn't say was that the then-present Link and Zelda defeated Calamity Ganon with the help of the Guardians and the Divine Beasts. No mention of champions though. The King of Hyrule got scared that the Sheikah would use their technology to overthrow the kingdom, so he told them to bury the Divine Beasts underground, and then a faction of the Sheikah split off from them called the Yiga clan, a clan who pledged allegiance to Ganon. With the Sheikah scattered and banished, many of them abandoned their technology. Hyrule declined to a primitive state, and the Sheikah eventually settled in Kakariko village after they were no longer banished by the royal family. So, what notable technology did the Sheikah leave Hyrule with? Other than the Guardians and the Divine Beasts, cool buildings, weapons, the Sheikah Slate. This beautiful piece of technology lets Link freeze something in place with stasis, create an ice block, spawn bombs, magnetize things, take photos, summon the Master Cycle, and most importantly, use an amiibo. This amiibo feature allows Link to spawn items from what appears to be nothing. But what if it was from a different time, a different space, or even a different place in Hyrule? The Gate of Souls, baby! That's how we piece it all together. What if the Sheikah came across the goddess / guardian of time during the technological boom and somehow imitated the Gate of Souls, or even used it? It was previously mentioned by the Game Rant article that there are Wind Waker references in Breath of the Wild, but there are actually references to lots of games in the game, and these games span every timeline split. Kaepora Pass, Canalit Ridge, Malin Bay, Karok Bridge, Mount Daphnes, Lake Colombo, Romani Plains, Darunia Lake, Bridge of Eldon, Golo River, Lake Daman, Eventide Island, and many more. You can find more of these in the Zelda study, every location name reference in Breath of the Wild, probably Part 1. Article by Stephanie Kusumano from Zelda Universe that I'll have linked in the description. There's also so many more that this article doesn't include. How else do you explain these references from other timeline splits? It has to be the Gate of Souls. The Sheikah either used the Gate of Souls or replicated its ability in a better form to bring different lands together and or create knowledge of previous eras and timeline splits. Plus, along with being able to summon items and the Master Cycle through the Sheikah Slate via some sort of Gate of Souls replica, Stasis would also utilize that same power, literally freezing something in time. BAM! Timeline splits have converged as one during the Sheikah technological era, but what happened to the goddess/guardian of time? She could have disappeared or have been slain, leading the Sheikah to study the gate freely, or maybe she allowed the Sheikah to do all of this. It's fine if it stays a mystery. There we go, we've set everything up for Breath of the Wild to fit in the timeline. But wait, what about Breath of the Wild 2? Well, that's easy, it would just continue sometime after Breath of the Wild, right? Yeah. So that's it. It's not it. We have to go and commit a sin. Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. I have my gripes with this game and I really want to make a video about it once the final DLC is released and I finish it. From what we see in the game, it starts off 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, where Zelda's abilities awaken. A little piece of shit guardian named Terako jumps into a fucking portal and finds itself in Hyrule before the events where Zelda's powers awaken. A portal, hey? The Gate of Souls, Sheikah technological boom, etc. But we have an issue. The events leading up to Breath of the Wild don't happen. The biggest event being that there's a new antagonist called Astor, the Yiga clan become allies, the champions don't die, and their successors from Breath of the Wild are sent to this new damn era to help beat Calamity Ganon, who is now turned into some Majora's Wrath looking dude. Terako couldn't save the timeline it was from, so it jumped to another and helped to save that one. I think Terako also helps to implant memories from Breath of the Wild Zelda into the Age of Calamity Zelda. Honestly, there's a lot to take in. And now, I feel obliged to add another timeline split, right here when Zelda's powers awaken 100 years before Breath of the Wild. This can be a good thing. Think about it. Hyrule Warriors had a fun story converging everything together, so maybe we can get another story like that eventually. We have the champions alive in this split here, and they're great characters, so maybe we'll see more of them. But I would hope that we keep going primarily down this part of the timeline. So let's do a quick summary of what was explained in this video. The timeline we have is fine, however, we needed a timeline split convergence to happen to account for Breath of the Wild having references from games in multiple splits. That's where Hyrule Warriors comes in and establishes time and space travel through the Gate of Souls and the goddess/guardian of time. 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild, the Sheikah go through a technological boom and in that time, encounter the goddess/guardian of time and develop time and space manipulating technology like the runes on the Sheikah Slate. This is thanks to the Gate of Souls, and they replicated its ability in a better form to bring different lands together and or create knowledge of previous eras and timeline splits. From Breath of the Wild, we move to Breath of the Wild 2, and we have another split for Age of Calamity because of cringe-ass Terako. So, the fix that I've proposed isn't perfect. The biggest issues I can see lie in Hyrule Warriors, what a shocker, saying that everyone was grabbed from their errors at a convenient time that doesn't interrupt the plot of the games they're from and maybe no one remembers anything was the best explanation I could come up with. This has so many holes in it that someone with trypophobia would be terrified. The same can be said with the landmasses that were merged into Hyrule to a lesser extent. There's also not enough elaboration on the Gate of Souls and time and space travel. Speaking of the Gate of Souls, the goddess/guardian of time, making the executive decision and saying that they're the same person makes sense to me, but there's almost no information out there about who she is. So it gets shaky here, but I suppose that's how it's gonna go when trying to add new things to the canon to try and make a fix. I also kind of wish that the events of Age of Calamity didn't have time travel elements, because we do get to see what happened 100 years before Breath of the Wild, but not really at all. And it also causes another timeline split, which I didn't want, but I also didn't want to ignore the game. Finally, we could have so many cool games based on what I talked about in this video. For starters, the Valley of the Flood, a rumored Zelda game based around the events before Hyrule was flooded in the adult split. It's been talked about before, and I elaborated on it a bit in my Zelda Iceberg video. Some fans who go by Bremen Yarg also made a soundtrack for the game concept. The soundtrack is great and really captures the steampunk atmosphere of the game. You can find the soundtrack playlist linked in the description. We could also have games related to Ganondorf being separated and spread over time and space, the Sheikah technological boom, the birth of Calamity Ganon, how he was slain the first time, and the fight against him 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild. Those concepts would make for some crazy cool games. And then we have Breath of the Wild 2 speculations. Ganondorf is looking pretty crusty. I wonder what that's about. Prosthetic arm? New Sheikah runes? Souls? Hylian writing? Could we be having another Skyloft creation style event with the landmasses being put into the sky? That wouldn't affect the timeline too much, but it would feel like the series is being taken full circle. It would truly have been a very long roundabout journey. And that's that. This is how I would fix the Legend of Zelda timeline. Please let me know what you thought of my fix in the comments section. I'd be pretty interested to hear what you have to say about it. And if you have any other ideas on how you would fix or change up the timeline, please let me know too, because I'm sure there are other reasons to add or remove games. If you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be very much appreciated. Apologies if my audio sounded a bit strange in this video. I've been messing around with audio editing and I wanted to give some techniques a go. I have some more Zelda content I want to make, like one on Age of Calamity and maybe one on the gap between dimensions. I've also got some more iceberg charts I want to cover. And if it tickles your fancy, make sure you check out my other channel, Soda Jump, that I made with Harry. As stated at the start of the video, we're playing through the Link's Awakening remake and Metroid Dread at the moment, with plans for more funnies in the future. A link to the channel will be in the description. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I hope you all have a great day or night, whatever the time may be.